Thank you, everyone, for coming. I wanted to bring in some guest speakers. So today we have Nadaya Cross, which most of you know, but she's still my guest. And she's going to be talking about accommodations and accessibility. And she, of course, has a lot of knowledge when it comes to students with disability and accommodations. Nadaya, who is director over in disability services for students.
Okay, hello everyone. I appreciate you coming up with this idea to talk about access and accommodations, and I'm hoping to address how these two things can work together. So again, my name is Nadaya. I'm a licensed social worker and the director of disability services. I've been here for feels like forever. I want to start off with establishing what is our goal in even messing with accommodations. What is the goal with access? Like, what is the point short of just, hey, compliance? It's the law. It says we have to do that. Our goal is to ensure that all students have the same opportunity to receive and share information with the institution. That's really what this all boils down to. What ways, what avenues can we take to receive information from our students and to share information with our students? We can achieve this goal through accommodations, which is a retroactive approach, or we can do it with access, which is a proactive approach. Usually we end up somewhere in the middle. So I want to share real quick the accommodation process that students have to follow, and then we're going to dip into access. This is a very quick overview of it. First off, students must apply online. The law says that they are required to self-identify as a disabled person. We do not go hunt them down in the classroom, like you may have seen in the K through 12 world. The student must provide us documentation from a qualified provider that is an expert in the field of disability or historical information about where they had accommodations in the past. We try to not make that a huge burden for them. We want them to be able to engage with us as quickly as possible. And then they are required to attend a welcome meeting with our staff. A little bit of a caveat on that, we have recently launched an alternative path that allows students to fill out a questionnaire. It's pretty detailed and provide the documentation where we can bypass the welcome meeting and just review without having a conversation. But that only works for certain accommodations. So during that welcome meeting, the staff will discuss with the student their lived experiences. We believe that the disabled student is the expert in their body. They live with this disability every day. They know what's what, and we want to hear from them primarily. We consider all aspects of what the student is going through. So we think about the academic program the student is in. We consider any policies that are in place both within our department and the larger university. And we also think about the legal limitations that are placed upon us as practitioners when we determine these reasonable accommodations. So I want to highlight just real quick about these two limitations that may come into play for us as practitioners, but could potentially be addressed through access. So there are only two legal reasons why we can deny an accommodation. The first one is a fundamental alteration. That is an accommodation that has altered an essential component of the course so significantly that the student learning outcomes cannot be attained. Maybe it invalidates any kind of academic requirements or risk accreditations. It is a very high bar to meet. I've only seen it happen twice since I've been here. It's a very high bar to meet. Ideally, we want to be able to provide accommodations that, again, allows the students to receive or share information with us. But sometimes it happens, ultimately they're here to get a degree. We're not just gonna print it off real fast and hand it over to them without them doing the work. The other limitation would be an undue burden or an administrative burden. So a provision of an accommodation that would create such a significant financial or administrative burden on the institution. Again, that is an extremely high bar to meet. So an example of what that would be let's say a student comes in and they are deaf and blind. They need a tactile interpreter, which is someone who can sign into their hands. It's a very specialized skill. It is very wearing on the interpreter's body, and it's expensive. If my department was to say, no, we can't provide a tactile interpreter, we don't have the funds, the Department of Justice would come in and look at the entire budget of a university. They don't look at just TW Disability Services budget. They look at everyone and say, oh, you guys are building a new building. You guys are doing this, you're doing that. Yeah, you can afford it. So again, it's a really high bar to meet, but we do everything within our power to make sure we can provide reasonable accommodations. Administrative burden would be something that is so administratively taxing that it would be impossible to meet. So, for example, this is kind of a low-hanging fruit, and I don't know that it would necessarily meet this bar, but let's say that we wrote up an arbitrary accommodation that said, faculty, you must write a study guide for this student, only this student, for every exam in your class, and you have weekly exams. I would never write that as an accommodation, okay? Don't panic. I would never do that. But hypothetically, well, that's not a part of your practice. You are already teaching 5+ courses, and you have your research, and you have other things that are on our plate, right? Because all of us at TWU are typically wearing 2 to 3 hats in our roles. That would be an example out of an administrative burden. But again, I would never write that as an accommodation. Don't panic. These can be very significant. These are things that we think about when students are asking for accommodations of, are any one of these accommodations that students are asking for, are they going to cause a fundamental alteration? Are they going to cause an administrative burden? How can we avoid that or look for another solution for the student so we can avoid that as a limitation? So changing gears just real quick away from accommodations, I like to think of accommodations and access as a continuum. I live, eat, and breathe on the accommodation side, where I'm doing everything retroactively. I'm learning about your course and how you structure things, and I'm seeing where I can fit in something here to help the student receive and share information with you. Access is the other side of things where we have an inclusive design. The space is ready for anyone who may walk in the door, and I have prepared in such a way that everybody, for the most part, can receive and share information with me in a multitude of ways. I'm ready for anyone. Granted, there will always be a caveat. There's always going to be someone that we didn't expect to come in. This is where Teresa lives and the instructional designer lives. I know enough to get me in trouble, and I do have a few ideas of things that we can do, but it's a continuum. So I want to give a visual representation real quick of what this actually looks like. So these are 3 images that kind of explain the continuum that we work in. It is the first image on the far left is 3 people watching a baseball game, and one person's view is blocked by a wooden fence. They're all standing on similar sized boxes trying to watch the game. Now, your first thought is probably, well, why didn't they buy the darn ticket to go sit in the stands, right? I know, but just ignore that part for a second that they're watching a game for free, okay? This first image where the littlest person, their view is impeded by the wooden fence, this represents inequality. So for some of our students, they can access everything that's happening in the classroom from the get-go, but that doesn't mean that every single student can. They did a study back in 2019 to 2020 that found 21% of undergrad students are disabled. So if you're teaching undergrad classes, at least a fifth of your class are disabled. They are the little person on the box that's trying to receive the same information as everybody else, but they cannot. Accommodation, which is where Disability Services lives, is the middle photo where the boxes have now been rearranged. The person that's standing in the middle, they're about, I guess I would say, average height. They're standing on one box, they can watch the game, and the littlest person is now standing on 2 boxes above the fence where they can watch the game, and then the tallest person on the far left can still see the game. They don't need a box because they can see over the fence, but the fence is still there. Accommodation can create equity for students to fully engage and learn in the classroom, but it still requires retrofitting. It requires us to make some modifications, move stuff around, and oftentimes we're coming in kind of late in the semester, because who knows when students are going to actually request their accommodation letters and say, oh, by the way, by exam 2 for next week, you need to give this person extended time. Okay, that's, rough. That's one more thing on your to-do list to add that you have to take care of now. The other end of the spectrum is access. So again, same baseball game, same 3 people, but instead of a wooden fence and the students standing on a box, there's a chain link fence where they can see through the fence. They're receiving the same information as everybody else. Everyone is getting the same information. They can all view and enjoy the game, or in this case, they can all view and learn from you as the instructor equally. So all barriers have been removed for students. It negates the need for accommodations. We took those boxes away, Everything is accessible, so we don't have to retrofit anything because it's ready for everyone who comes in the room. But again, they really should have just bought the tickets to the baseball game and watched in the stands, right? That's assuming the field is accessible to them. Some things to think about when looking at your coursework or your pedagogy with accessibility. I want to say one caveat. I am not an educator. I am a disability services professional. I have not been formally taught on pedagogy. I don't know how to do what you do. Feel free to interpret this in a way that makes the most sense to you. Because again, I'm not a teacher. I don't do what you do, and that's okay because you guys are amazing at it. Think about whatever your true goal is. For this class, this assignment, what are we really wanting the students to know? Do we really want them to know, for example, APA guidelines and how to write professionally, or are we really trying to teach them about understanding the philosophy that goes behind the development of, the attachment theory within social work, for example? What is the true target here, and how can we make that happen? If your true goal is APA guidelines, awesome, let's make that accessible. But if our real goal is understanding of theory, then let's focus on that. Think creatively. Sometimes solutions require creative ideas. A question, why have we done things this way all the time? Are we sticking to this particular method of teaching this way on this particular theory because this is how it was always done? This is what was taught to me. Is there a legitimate reason behind why we would not change a particular process? I've worked with nursing faculty quite a bit. And when I first started, there was, at least from what I can recall, and I could be a little wrong on this part. So if you're anybody from the nursing department, please forgive me. There was a lot of apprehension around recording in class. Understandably, you are working in the health field. You're working with patients. You are governed by HIPAA, which says we can't talk about anyone about anything for any reason. I understand that. However, if a student wants to learn whatever you're teaching them, and we know that they have a disability that prevents them from engaging in note-taking in a traditional format, meaning handwriting on paper, then why can't we record if you're not supposed to be talking about patients in your classroom? So what the nursing faculty did, which I think is phenomenal, is they are now the ones recording class and making it available to everybody. So everyone is getting the same information. Everyone has the same opportunity to learn and engage in a different modality and review the content later on. And it was a great flip that negated the need for an accommodation, for one, and gave full access to all students, regardless if they're disabled or not. I threw in some examples of different aspects that we see that where we accommodate quite a lot, and they can be used in the digital aspect, but they can also be used in the classroom for synchronous courses. Again, I'm not a teacher. These are ideas that I've heard from other people. So, for example, for exams, have them be untimed. We would never write that as an accommodation. It's not a thing. We would not do that. Please don't panic. But what is the purpose of having a timer on an exam? Is it that we want them to be able to perform a certain task within a time limit, or is it we just want them to hit submit in a reasonable time frame? Both of those are okay. Just be intentional about why the time is set the way it is. Consider having group exams. I know there's a kinesiology faculty member who's doing this now, and it's really cool. You're kind of dispersing that anxiety that comes with testing, and everyone gets to have a shared learning opportunity in this assessment process. Consider also having open book exams. I don't know about you, but I Google stuff quite a bit in my real-time job. I'm not regurgitating a whole lot of stuff from memory. If there's something that I'm not confident in, I look it up. That's normal. That's what our students would do in the real world. So is the purpose for them to have this particular task memorized because we're meeting these professional standards that may be designed for a non-disabled person? Or is it for a true, standard within the profession that they need to know to pass a licensing exam? Just explore that as a concept and wonder, why do we need to have it done from memory versus being able to use reference tools? So there's a faculty member who is in nutrition in their capstone course. Their exams are timed, but it is open note, open book. You can use the internet because that's what you would do in the real world when you're on the job. You would look this information up. There's still quite a bit that you're expected to do from memory, of course, but we have these amazing tools with us every single day. The other idea was a minimum set time. So this one is, I heard from a nursing faculty member at a different university where everyone has to sit for a minimum of 90 minutes on the exam. That's how long the class is. And then if you have extended time, you can stay a little bit later, but it normalizes making everyone be there. And what we hear oftentimes from students is they are extremely anxious or nervous when they see other students get up and turn in the exam, and they perceive themselves as being less knowledgeable or less competent in their education compared to their peers because their peers finished faster than them. Now, what we really know from being on the outside, the student who turned in their exam first probably just guessed on everything, right? But in the moment when you're taking this exam, it's really hard to think about that logically. We can't shut off their anxiety, but maybe we can modify the classroom in such a way that everyone has to stay seated. We're not going to distract each other. I don't care that you finished in 5 minutes, you're going to sit there for 90 minutes. And then everyone else can stay as long as they need to finish the exam. For note taking, you can have group note taking. I believe the English department does this in their graduate level classes where individual students are assigned different days where they're the ones taking the notes on a shared Google Doc, and then it trades off. That way the other students can just sit there and be engaged and listen, and they still have the information they need. This is a great tool to expose students to other note-taking styles. As we know, for many of our students, they don't know how to take notes. That can be a little frustrating. We, of course, refer them to academic coaching, but that could be good exposure from their peers to understand how to engage with capturing the knowledge that you guys are sharing. One of our most common accommodations is access to the PowerPoints in advance. That is done for a variety of reasons. Sometimes students need it to adjust with their assistive technology. So, for example, one of the colleagues on the call was talking about there's a student who cannot perceive written information unless the background is black and the text is white. For other students, they need to be able to utilize it with a screen reader. That's really hard to do when you're in the middle of class and you're supposed to be taking notes, when you're trying to manipulate the file right then and there. So consider making the PowerPoints or any of your class notes available to everybody ahead of the time so you can just, check off that accommodation, for example, and everyone has access. One of the cool things that the math department does is they have these worksheets that are fill in the blank, and they go through all of the individual math problems together and fill out like all of the main points, the main topics together. So students are not focusing on, well, crud, what's important? I don't know what to write down. You've already told them what to write down. You've already shared with them, this is what I find to be important, and this is what you need to take out of this. And it takes the guesswork and that nervousness out of the process where they can just absorb all this beautiful information. For lecturing, again, this is something that's very unique to synchronous courses, of course. Well, no, Zoom classes, just kidding. If a student asks a question, repeat the question for everyone to hear. This can be vital for students who utilize sign language interpreters or captioners. Sometimes the interpreter or the captioner may not hear what the other student said, especially if they're working on Zoom. So by you repeating it, you're making sure that the deaf student in particular has full access. This could be beneficial for any students recording lecture as well. Maybe the recording didn't catch what Susie Q. Jones said in the back. It's also a great way to ensure that you understood what the question was initially by just rephrasing it for a little bit, which can be beneficial for our neurodivergent students. One of the things that I'm actually doing today is reading through all the text on every slide. I know sometimes students complain like, oh, the faculty is reading every single word, but that's actually a really good thing for our students who are blind or who have dyslexia. They get to hear you say the information, so they're receiving it auditorily, and they're reading the information, so they're receiving it visually. That it allows for multiple modalities of them to learn. It's a great thing to do. And then the last thing would be to describe important images. So earlier on the other slide, I described in great detail the different images of the students watching the baseball game or the people watching the baseball game. If it's an important image, describe it, especially if it's something that a student needs to know about. That can be impactful not only for our students who are blind, but what if you're teaching asynchronously and you're not looking at the screen, the student's not looking at the screen because they're typing their notes or they're trying to read through an article, or they're probably on Instagram. They're still capturing the information that you're describing, and they can picture what's supposed to be happening. Now, I'm not describing all the cutesy little images that are on my slides today because they're not important. They're cutesy, and I like them. For communication, ask direct and specific questions. So, for example, if the student says some kind of comment, you're like, well, why did you do that? Or why did you think that? That is vague and can be a little confusing for a student who's neurodivergent. Instead, it may be more beneficial to say, why did you say specifically XYZ, and how does that pertain to this class? So that they know exactly what you're looking for and they know how to answer correctly, or at least get the information that you're looking for. Be mindful of transitions during class time. If we just abruptly switch topics or change gears really fast, it can be jarring for someone who's neurodivergent, specifically autistic. That having this schedule and I know what to predict can help with anxiety or planning on how to behave or how to mask. And it can be difficult to make that quick transition without any kind of warning or any kind of prompting to say, okay, now we're changing topics to immunology. I said that wrong. And then again, offer multiple ways for students to receive information. So like earlier, I was talking about reading the text on every slide. That would be a great example of where they can receive it multiple ways. Or if you have the students listen to an audio podcast, there's no visual output, consider sharing a transcript. Well, I mean, we should share a transcript for that podcast so that if a student doesn't want to listen to it, they can at least read through the information. For group work, develop community rules where students are, y'all together said, we're going to have respect for each other. We're going to have open communication or what have you. That way the expectations for everybody is clear from the get-go. This is a big one we hear from students, especially with psychological disorders. It can be extremely anxiety inducing for students to work in groups. And when we talk through that, it's a normal aspect of work that we are prepping our students for, but there's still a great way that you as faculty can make this a safe space for the student to engage with their peers. And then refer to the group as a whole instead of individuals. So, if you're having like the group exams, for example, in the classroom, you can refer to group A instead of, hey, Billy Bob Joe, what does your group do? That putting someone on the spot can be extremely jarring for some students. And then clearly define group roles. So have a student identify, you are going to be the leader and you're going to be the organizer or what have you, or have them volunteer for these roles so that it's not an arbitrary decision on how to make these things. Now, I know we're all thinking like, these people are adults. They should be able to do this themselves. I know. But for disabled students, there may be different aspects that are coming into play that prevent them from being able to take a very intentional path in group work to be able to establish these rules for themselves. Also, as you guys know, the students that are coming in, especially our undergrad students, they were in middle school during COVID. They did not have that wonderful opportunity to engage in some of the social development that we had the opportunity of doing while we were in middle school and early high school. So we're unfortunately having to teach some of these behaviors, and this is a great way to build that structure for them so they know how to appropriately engage with their peers. And then lastly, of how to create access within classroom is looking at our own perceptions of disability. If you hear any harmful language within your classroom, go ahead and address it if you feel comfortable doing so. Someone says, the R word, call that out. That's not appropriate language. That's not socially acceptable. It's a very dangerous and hurtful word. If you feel comfortable doing that for things like that, that's, a real drastic example, but there are other ways that it could be harmful. Like, oh, girl, you're crazy. That's an implication going back to the insane asylums. Not fun. And then avoid assumptions, like making the assumption of like, can deaf people drive? Yes, they can. Look inside yourself and think about like what are my own assumptions and what can I perceive or think about with disabled students and how they can engage in this profession. And I'm open to having a fruitful conversation with you about things that we could do or like those assumptions that you have. I'm a safe space. It's great. And then utilize disability friendly language. So disability friendly language would be saying the word disability. It is a very proud and wonderful word that is widely accepted by the disabled community, and it is actually preferred over saying someone who has an impairment or someone who's physically challenged or differently abled. Disability is the preferred term. So you can use phrases like person first language, which is a person with a disability or a student with a disability, or identity first language, which is a disabled person or a disabled student. There's not controversy, but conversation in the community. There's conversation right now in the community about what is the preferred method. Both are safe, and I use both interchangeably. Even with access, there are limitations. So we can plan beautifully for everything in the world and just think this is the best class ever. I'm so accessible. I'm recording. I've shared my slides ahead of time. My exams are untimed. There's no group work. It's perfect. And then stuff is going to happen. Unexpected stuff is going to happen. It's totally okay. Maybe one day you have a technology failure and Panapto's not recording. It happens. It's fine. There can be a backup, or that's the day that students, you don't need to pull out your phone and record yourself. You may have an off day where it's just, I'm not feeling it. I am not, empathetic today. I don't have my feels on, and that's okay. I'm not ready to engage in this work. Totally fine. There may also be programmatic issues or things that must be done in a certain way that make it really difficult to make some aspect of your course accessible. So two of the biggest ones that came to mind when I was writing this up is our required clinical hours in nursing. Students must have 90 hours per semester, I think it is, in nursing and clinical work. There is no wiggle room on that at all. And they are restricted by when the clinicians are in the workspace, and they have to be there. So flexible attendance is not really a thing. We have to get creative on how to support students to make sure they still get their hours, which we've got a way to do it. It's worked out great. But that's a real big limitation. There's no way we can have a flexible deadline or policy built in. Another example was physical movements needed in ceramics. You have to be present to fire up the kiln. You have to be physically there to use the pottery wheel. That just has to happen. Otherwise, you can't meet the certain learning outcomes, for example, of a ceramics course. That's a very real need. So there may be other ways that we need to look at how to make this space accessible for a student that maybe has some physical impairments. It's a lot. So I do want to acknowledge that I am sharing a lot of stuff with you guys of like, you should do this and you should do that. And oh my gosh, there is no expectation for any of the stuff to be like done tomorrow because we're human and we can only take on so much, right? Like it's a lot. And I know faculty, especially you guys are doing so much and it's a lot. I hear it frequently from our faculty. So I hope that the suggestions don't feel overwhelming or frustrating of like, oh, one more thing to do. I hope that you see them as a tool, as another way to engage and just be, mindful of how we can do things for our students to improve their learning experience.
I am open to recording my lectures in class, but a lot of our rooms, and specifically one, is configured very strangely that makes it very awkward to record.
Okay.
Like the instructor station is literally facing the wall in the back of the room. It's really weird. Yeah, so usually I'll take the mouse and keyboard over to the middle of the room at like a little stand or podium, which is great, but then that doesn't let me record my demonstrations or anything. So I do feel like I can open that conversation with my division to rearrange the room, but is there a way that, y'all would be able to back me up too?
Yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation. Maybe we can get like the IT classroom guys in on it too, because we talk with Joe Condris a lot on physical access in the room. Because there may be other things going on in that space too that we're not aware of. Like, is there enough egress for wheelchair users, for example? Or
Right. And
yeah.
it's like a computer lab, so it is pretty tight, but like I feel like we gotta be able to do something.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Whenever you say go, let's do it.
What are like some of your most common questions or issues that you face as faculty related to accommodations or accessibility, but accommodations? Because I know Nadaya talked a little bit about kind of the most common accommodations requested, but I hear it from the faculty side occasionally, but I'd like to hear more.
I often get like requests to have extended times on exams, but since I teach in the art and design department, we don't really have traditional exams. So it tends to like not be an issue. I think extended time on assignments usually is more relevant.
Yeah, extended time on exams is definitely like one of the top ones that we provide to students. So it just covers a myriad of things that they could be experiencing.
One that I've gotten quite a bit is access to notes ahead of time or PowerPoints ahead of time. Yeah, and it's like, the first time I got it, I was like, oh, okay, that's easy to do. And now it's just something I do automatically. So it's nice when you get those accommodation letters and you're like, already done.
Right? It feels good.
Students recording during class that I've transitioned to just recording my class, that it's easier to just go ahead and provide that like y'all suggested. That way the burden isn't on them. It's easy enough for me to do in the moment.
You provided us with an accessible version of your presentation. So you and I talked a little bit beforehand. So I know that you created the presentation that we all saw for those of us that could visually see the presentation, and you created that in Canva, but then you provided an accessible version of the presentation, and that's in PowerPoint. So can you kind of address that? Like how did you make that? Was it hard? Why did you make the accessible version the way you did?
Sure.
And I don't know if everyone has looked at that, but I actually copied that up into a shared Google Drive so they could click on the link and they can download that if they want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So I love Canva. I adore Canva. I pay for Canva out of my personal pocket. I think this stuff is bomb.com. It is the worst tool for accessibility in the entire universe. It is not good for accessibility. In fact, when you download any kind of Canva document and you're trying to make it accessible, like in PDF, often you get a lot of errors or a lot of like retrofitting work that you have to do. And I am not an Adobe Acrobat guru by any means, but I know enough to get me in trouble. So what I chose to do today was create a very simple, low-key version of the slide deck in PowerPoint using the built-in layouts that PowerPoint uses, because those have already been designed to be accessible for a screen reader. And because I don't like to assume that we all have the same knowledge, a screen reader is a built-in device to a person's computer or cell phone that will read literally everything on the screen, including like the buttons that you have to click. So if you hover your mouse over the X, it's going to say exit. So if you're using the pre-formatted layouts within PowerPoint, everything is gravy. The screen reader will read it and it follows a logical reading order. Canva does not have that kind of functionality. I can also add alternative text, which is a tool that allows the screen reader to describe the image that is on the screen. Unfortunately, screen readers are not smart enough yet to be able to do that automatically. I mean, iPhone, Apple is trying through Siri, but we're not there yet. I can add that information and anyone can read through that image and understand the point that I'm trying to convey with that image. With PowerPoint, let's say you don't like the layout that's provided to you within the PowerPoint, and you want to move around the text boxes, unfortunately, or add your own text boxes, that will take away the accessibility of the PowerPoint feature, which is a total bummer. So I did have to get a little creative on how I made the slides because it didn't work for me with the 3 images. I wanted the 3 side by side. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I had to make separate slides for each one. So, accessibility is not always pretty like Canva is, which is quite a bummer, but it's better to be accessible for everyone to share and receive the same information than get in trouble for having something that's pretty. I think I answered your question thoroughly.
You did. No, absolutely. So I'm thinking if I was an instructor and I was wanting to do something like this, I might have created this low-key accessible PowerPoint first to just get my thoughts down. And then when I went over to Canva to do my designing, where I was going to put in images and make it more colorful and pretty, that's when I would do that. But I would already have my basic ideas down. So it's kind of like an outline per se that you could do in advance. And then it doesn't seem like you're doing double the work. You've got your outline together, and that's going to be for everyone. And then you're going to do your visual presentation. And obviously, if it's visual, it's only going to be for people that can see, because if you can't see or you have issues with seeing, then that's going to, if you're blind or you have a visual impairment, you have a problem seeing, which leads me to something that Stephanie was talking about. So Stephanie, would you mind mentioning what you're dealing with right now with the student and kind of how that happened? And
just a student who has a visual impairity that needs to be able to see everything with a black background and a white text. So searching databases, they don't work that way. So you can listen to the article, but to search, you're not going to be able to search and listen to each item as it's being discovered. She's got a broad topic, and just being able to try to communicate clearly. So trying to do everything in Word, where I typically do everything in Google Docs, so that I could provide a black background with a white text. But even then, having to convert everything that I could has been really challenging.
And can you mention how that student came to have this
she had
disability?
a brain tumor that was removed, which affected her optic nerve. And so her ability she said she could see before, but with this latest occurrence is how she got this disability. She said she's accommodated herself at work by doubling up everything that she does. But one of the interesting things that she told me was that as part of the training at her workplace, they did a PowerPoint presentation, which she couldn't see.
Sounds about right.
She could hear them, but she couldn't see it. And when she asked the vendor who was doing it if she could have some accommodation, it's like, no, because it's all proprietary information. And she said, so this affects her ability to advance at work if training is provided.
I thought that was very interesting, Stephanie, because I think a lot of times as faculty members, just as people in general, just as human nature, we kind of think of disability as something that someone had from birth, particularly visual, impairments, blindness, things like that. And it's not really. Oftentimes it is something that happens to you later in life. Sometimes it might be medical. Sometimes it might be an accident.
Those are all invisible disabilities. Our fifth group is where you start seeing physical disabilities where it's visual based.
Well, thank you so much, Nadaya. I appreciate it so much. It was wonderful, wonderful presentation.